There is a two-speed recovery happening at this point. Let's start off with the US here. North America is leading the economic upturn. New figures show that the US economy is growing faster than had been expected. It's a rate of about 2.9% this quarter. Canada also expected to have fairly strong growth at 2.5% in the first two quarters of the year. Let's get you to Japan, where we're seeing a moderate rebound, still recovering from last year's devastating tsunami, of course. Expected, though, to push ahead now with 3.4% growth this quarter. Those are great numbers, and 1.4% next. We'll compare both of those to what is the Eurozone here. Members failing to kickstart their economies. France, Germany and Italy's forecasts are, quite frankly, dire. Will actually shrink by 0.4% next quarter, and they'll only grow 0.9%. We took that austerity versus stimulus debate, because that's what this is, of course. The Americans have tried to spend their way out of this, whereas the Europeans, of course, trying to cut their way out of this. So we took that debate to the experts. Investment broker Peter Schiff runs Euro-Pacific Capital. He believes cutting costs is the only way to rescue failing economies. And Peter Morici is international business professor at the University of Maryland. He's a regular guest here on CNN. He says, spend your way into prosperity. That is the only way to go. Well, I started by suggesting that the playing field wasn't necessarily level when the global recession broke. So does the austerity is broke argument effectively really hold any water? After all, some European economies like Greece were effectively bankrupt even before this downturn in 2008. Here's how Peter Morici answered that.
Well, they surely were bankrupt before the recession, if you really look closely at them, and they were spending too much money and in the wrong ways. You know, certainly the retirement ages need to be raised, and the labor laws, which have very little to do with spending, need to be changed so the markets are more flexible and people work longer. But now this massive spending cuts, while they put those things in place, you know, is really tanking their economies, and it is going to make it difficult to sustain those reforms. You know, it's going to be difficult to win elections if you're a government, if you have 25, 35% unemployment. You know, there's limits to what austerity can do for you in that regard.
I would say the problem is that the spending cuts are too small. We need deeper spending cuts so that resources can be freed up to the private sector to make the investments that are needed.
Let me put this to you, Peter Schiff.
I don't know that you can do that.
Let me put this to Peter Schiff. The Chancellor of the Exchequer here, George Osborne, who has been a massive austerity fan over the last couple of years since the government has been in, has recently, in the past week or so, lowered taxes, for example, on the middle classes. Now, he will be looking to that as a sort of dose of stimulus to a certain extent. Now, Europe, of course, sits outside of the crisis in the Eurozone. You say the Eurozone hasn't been austere enough, but surely when you see the strikes in Spain, when you see the pain that the Greeks are going through, isn't stimulus now, combined with austerity, the way to go in Europe?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, just because people who have been living off the public, who've been feeding off the public trough, are upset that they're going to have to take less, yeah, they're going to go and protest. They feel entitled to this spending, but the countries are broke. The taxpayers can't afford it.
So what do you do?
The fact that they're upset and complaining, that's part of the process. That's a good thing. Let them complain. You know, but you can't just simply give them more money because they're complaining about a loss of benefits. Where's the money going to come from? Are they just going to print it? Are they going to destroy their currency? That's what we're doing in America. We're going to destroy the dollar. We're going to suffer dramatically because we are not having those protests. I would rather have Americans protesting now who are losing government benefits than have them protest in the future when the dollar collapses and it's a real mess.
Mr. M.
The reason the American dollar is losing its value over time is because the economy is not growing, and that has much more to do with the structural issues we have, the large trade deficits, the dependence on foreign oil and so forth, that we could correct, and this administration refuses to address. The burden of health care, which has been addressed, but in the wrong way. Those things are slowing American growth. At the end of the day, the value of your currency is going to be determined by the real economy, its ability to produce goods and services. That's why, for example, if the Greeks went back on the drachma, it wouldn't be worth very much, because after all these years of misappropriating assets,
hang on, guys. Final word. Stimulus or austerity? What works, Peter Schiff?
Well, we need real austerity, right? Not phony austerity. We need to shrink government. We need sound money. We need to let the market set interest rates, not the bureaucrats, which means a higher interest rate. We need to let assets reset. If that means lower home prices, lower stock prices, that's part of the recovery. Anything the government does to inhibit that process is going to make it worse.
Mr. Morici.
Well, there's limits to the virtues of stimulus, and we've run it out in the United States. We're not restructuring as we should, so stimulus is being abused here. In Europe, austerity is being abused. You know, it's one thing to restructure labor markets, to require people to work longer, you know, before retirement. It's another thing to so dramatically cut government spending, the economy collapses, and then the political will for change evaporates with it.